Hey, it's Mr. Hasquin, and I'm back with more things that you should know by being alive. Today I'm going to talk about the Whiskey Rebellion. You've probably heard of it, but do you know why it mattered so much? I guess the spoiler here would be that it tested the Constitution more than anything else in the Constitution's early years. So let's start here. In 1791, the brand new U.S. government needed money, needed income. And Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, came up with a solution. And the solution was to tax whiskey. Why whiskey? Well, because it was incredibly popular, especially in, the frontier areas like western Pennsylvania. And out there, whiskey wasn't just a drink. Whiskey was also kind of a currency. I mean, farmers distilled it from their grain, they traded it, they bartered with it, they used it to pay their debts. So, there we go. So, to many of them, the tax on whiskey felt quite unfair. It hit small rural distillers harder than the big urban distilleries. And so they saw it as some kind of, the same kind of tyranny that they had just fought a revolution to escape. So, resistance begins. First is noncompliance, then threats, then violence. And by 1794, federal tax collectors were being assaulted, tarred and feathered, and run out of town on rails. So, western Pennsylvania becomes like the epicenter, the focus of the anger. So you got these angry farmers that begin forming committees, they refuse to pay the tax, they hold public meetings, and these meetings weren't necessarily the polite kind. And then in July 1794, things kind of boil over. There's a group of rebels attack the home of a U.S. Marshal that was trying to enforce the tax. They burned down the home of a regional tax inspector as well. And they began to march in armed groups. It wasn't just a protest anymore. It looked a lot like a revolution. And so President George Washington saw this as a direct threat to the authority of the Constitution. The United States had a new federal government, and this was the first real test. If people could just ignore laws that they didn't like, then the entire system could face collapse. And so Washington's going to respond. So George Washington isn't going to play around here. He invokes the Militia Act of 1792 and called up a force of nearly 13,000 soldiers. This is more soldiers than he had actually led during most of the Revolutionary War. He put the army under the command of General Light Horse Harry Lee, the relative of Robert E. Lee. And Washington will even personally lead this army on his own for part of the way. So you think about that. You got a sitting president that leads the troops into the field, and we really haven't seen that since. I mean, James Madison during the evacuation of Washington, D.C. during the War of 1812, but I wouldn't say that Madison actually, led the troops. But anyway, when the army marches into western Pennsylvania, the rebellion collapsed almost instantly. I guess you can call them rebels. They scattered, some were arrested, 2 were convicted of treason, but then Washington ends up pardoning them. Why did Washington pardon them? Well, because he wanted to make a point. And the point was the federal government was strong enough to enforce its laws, but it was also wise enough to show mercy. So then, why does this all matter? What's the point here, right? So the Whiskey Rebellion might sound small compared to later events, but it meant everything at the time when it was happening. It was the first real test of federal authority under the Constitution. And George Washington passes it. I mean, peace was restored without a full-scale battle. But it also exposed some deep tensions that existed. 1, the divide between rural and urban America. 2, the resentment of frontier citizens toward Eastern elites. And then there's this fragility of public trust in this new national government. And so what happens next is it also begins to preview the rise of political parties. many who supported the rebels' cause became early Jeffersonian Republicans, that Democrat-Republican group. And they wanted, limited federal power and more rights for the states. And then the other side of that, Hamilton's camp, the Federalists, argued that strong national central authority was essential. So the Whiskey Rebellion wasn't just about whiskey, it was about what kind of country the United States was going to become. So the Whiskey Rebellion showed that the Constitution worked, that law and order would hold, but also it reminded Americans that liberty without trust can lead to conflict. So there you go. If you learned anything today, if you learned something new today, please, like and share and follow me. And I'll try to throw up some more things that you should know by being alive. History isn't just about what happened. It's about what still matters. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching.